John and Laura will be here. John and Laura will be here, in person. So housing is the most pressing economic and social issue in Canada today. And it's interesting the approach that the government took to it. By reading the budget, I almost felt like, well, everybody's a homeowner, or that's what the target market is. Well, that's not the case. 1/3 of Canadians rent, more than 1/3 of Canadians rent, and this is our customer. And there are many initiatives here to generate single family homes, home ownership, and things like that. But you can't forget that 1/3 of the Canadian population are seniors, students, young people, immigrants, people with lower incomes, people in transition, and they are renters, and there will always be a significant renter pool of people in Canada needing housing. So we're going to talk about the budget in general, but we're going to focus in on rental housing and how we solve this problem. So the housing supply problem that we have in Ontario, in Canada, is complex. It's multivariate. So there's no one thing you can do to fix the housing supply. There is no magic bullet. And this is a problem, but this is also an opportunity that will be here for a long time, right? We believe that the solution to the housing problem is not necessarily the government alone. It's certainly not the government alone. The private sector has to be a key part of this today. And the private sector needs a profitable path to affordable housing. Look, there are 23,000 apartment buildings in Ontario, 6 units or more. The vast majority of those were built by the private sector. So that's why we have housing in Canada, because the private sector built it. That's what it's going to take to solve the problem, going forward. Now, it's painfully obvious to you because most of you are non-governmental workers, but no developer is going to build affordable housing if he can't make as much or more money than what they're doing right now. It seems painfully obvious, I have to say that, but that's the case. So if you're building houses, apartments, hotel, or something else, you're not going to pivot and build affordable housing unless you can make the same amount of money or money doing it. And that's part of what we want to do today, is to talk about the path to profitability when you build apartments. So here's the good news. I believe, and we can show you the numbers, and we will, in future events, that you can build as much or more money building affordable housing, but you've got to think about it a little bit differently. Let me give you a generic example. Let's say you were to build an apartment building for $100 million, all in costs. Okay, make it 10 million, make it 100 million, right? If you were to build that for $100 million, when you are finished, 2-3 years later, when it's fully stabilized, that building would be worth $120 million. Okay, so to make up that $100 million of initial money you need to build a building, you get $80 million from the lender, and you put in $20 million of your own money as equity, right? So you build it for 100 million, be worth 120 million. In a sense, you've 2x'd your profit, right? You put in 20 million, and you made another 20 million, right? So you 2x'd it. That's the return on equity. The equity multiple here would be 2, right? Now, what if you built an affordable housing on that cost you $100 million? Okay, all in cost is 100 million. That affordable housing building might only be worth $108 million. Again, well, why would I build that? Well, one of the reasons you build it is because you need to put less money into that deal. So you might, if you can line up all your government and provincial and municipal grants and stack them together, you might be able to put in $2 million. Okay, and you put in 2 million to make 8 million, so you would 4x your equity. Okay, you haven't made as much money, but you didn't need as much to start with. And for developers who are oftentimes cash constrained, this is a good business for you to be in. Plus, you can charge development fees and construction fees and things like that. So the takeaway when we've looked at the numbers is that you can get a higher equity multiple if you build affordable housing. Okay, but the catch is you've got to go through the hoops and the bureaucratic channels that you have to go through when you're dealing with a government program. So today's webinar, it's not about the politics of things, and actually it's not about demand, because we know that the demand is there, right? It's about the practical steps for you in the private sector, in the real estate fraternity to pivot towards building affordable housing. And here's what I believe, and here's what our company believes, and I think what a lot of you believe. Number one, there's an obvious demand for renters. We don't need to talk about that anymore. It's there, it's clear, and so on. There's a less obvious demand from buyers. And what I'm saying, what we're seeing in the marketplace today is a lot of institutions, public money, private money, wants to be in the affordable housing sector. It's a good business to be in. It's a stable business to be in. And a lot of people are looking to do the right thing, whether it's for optics or they want to do the right thing, doesn't really matter. There is demand from an investment standpoint to buy fully stabilized affordable housing. What we need is the developer community to create it. Okay, so it's less obvious, but I think it's become more obvious that there are going to be buyers for this product, but there can't be buyers for this product till you get this product. Make sense? It's a chicken and egg problem. Someone's got to create it for someone to buy it. And if they're going to set up a fund or something like that, then they need to know that more product is coming. Number three, there is government will. Okay. And that will exists at, I think, all levels. It exists at the federal government, exists at CMHC, it exists at the provincial level, and it exists at the municipal level. So whether these programs are implemented efficiently or not, okay, affordable housing will get built. It's just a matter, because the problem is so acute that there really is no choice to solve the problem. The question is whether we do it efficiently, quickly, without a burden to the taxpayer, or whether we do it in a long, drawn-out way that's going to cost the taxpayer really a lot of money. But this problem has to get solved. I think there's will at the different levels of government. Now now what's required is a significant amount of coordination between the different levels of government. Number four, developers need to make a profit. Like, I shouldn't even need to say that, right? Developers are not going to build affordable housing if they can't make a profit. And I think when you run the numbers on certain sites, certain construction type, and so on, and with the right government programs in place, you can indeed make a profit, and a good profit relative to the risk that you're taking. Number five is we should just be realistic. There is no quick fix for this. In Ontario, we've had 45 years of rent controls, and that 45 years of rent controls has stymied the development of apartments. It's coming back slowly, but there is no quick fix. We all wish there was. But if it took us 45 years to get into the problem, it won't take us 45 years to get out of it. But nothing is getting fixed this year, next year, or the year after that. This is a long cycle. And part of that long cycle is this is also a long-term opportunity forming for the developer and for the people that support developers. And I'm going to sort of before we get to our speakers, I'm going to give you an example of the importance of affordable housing. I was lucky enough, when I was 8 years old, my family moved to Canada. I was born in Pakistan, and we came here in 1966, and we found decent, affordable housing. We rented a townhouse in Downsview, probably for a couple of $100s a month. That allowed my father to get a job, for us to get settled. And lo and behold, 2 years later, we had bought a house, right? But I visited that same townhouse that we lived in 1966, many years later, and I realized just how foundational it is to new Canadians to find good housing when they get here. So we all know this, that they say that a child's first 5 years is critical to their formation as an adult. Okay. I'm going to say that when an immigrant comes to Canada, and most immigrants, 80–90% of them live in rental housing when they get here, their first 5 years in Canada, they are reborn when you come to Canada. It's the new world, right? So the first 5 years in Canada as an immigrant determines the kind of Canadian you're going to be in your success here. And my family felt that success, right? Because there was affordable housing and lots of it in the 60s, right? So we have a lot of immigrants coming to Canada. We don't have enough housing. There are people living in basement apartments or family sharing, overpaying, breaking, municipal bylaws, all those things, right? And I don't think that they get the great start in their first 5 years to Canada unless they have good quality, affordable, safe rental housing. So it's an important part of what we do. And we look forward to just opening up the dialogue and look, we're a firm that teaches people how to do it. We're not talking about the politics of this. We're not talking about the demand. What we want to do is teach developers how to build apartments. We want to develop affordable housing developers. Okay, so the budget has certainly has some things in it for rental housing. They're providing $1.5 billion in the Rapid Housing Initiative program, but $1.5 billion at $250,000 per unit to build, and that's on the low side. That's only 6,000 units. We probably need 6,000 units in southwestern Ontario, right? To put a dent in the affordability problem. So there is no quick fix to this. There is a long-term fix, but in that long-term fix, there's an opportunity for the development community to form a solid, profitable business that will last many, many years. Okay, Rod, if you go to the agenda, I'll introduce our first speaker. Okay, so our first speaker today is Laura Gurr. Laura is a partner at Cohen Hiley, and she's going to go over a number of things related to affordable housing, but she's got serious experience in the nonprofit and the affordable housing sector. So Laura, welcome to our presentation.
Thank you for having me, Derek.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. So I'm going to just dig in at a pretty high level on the budget first, and then we'll talk about how you access these different programs. So first, we're looking at the federal budget. The budget clearly indicates the biggest issue is supply. That there are a number of factors that are at play, but when looking at the comparative countries, the average is 462 homes by 1,000 persons, and Canada is well below that. So CMHC and Finance Canada have estimated that we need to build 3.5 million new homes by 2031. And the goal in the budget is to double our housing construction over the next decade. And to do that, $8 billion approximately has been targeted at affordable housing development in the next 5 years. So the budget allocations, we're going to focus on, or this presentation is going to focus on the supply side measures that have been announced to support building more homes, including apartments and affordable housing units. However, as Derek said, that's a long-term solution. So it's still going to be a long time before we see the results of this have a cooling effect on the market. And in addition, the budget also contains a number of demand side incentives for first-time home buyers, including tax credits. And just there's a bit of a concern there that could actually heat up the market as well. So we'll see what this ends up doing in terms of housing affordability in the short term. So there are a couple of things. Derek touched on the Rapid Housing Initiative. So there's $1.5 billion over the next 2 years to cover the construction of new rental housing units, as well as the acquisition of land and the conversion or rehabilitation of existing buildings. So I'm interested to see, and there's been some talk about converting underutilized commercial spaces and retail spaces into affordable housing. So for any of you that own those types of properties, again, looking at the business case for how do you access these funds to make that business case make sense for you. And sorry, just in terms of just going back one, there's also the new Housing Accelerator Fund. That $4 billion is going to municipalities. But at the end, I'm going to talk about the different programs that municipalities have where you can directly work with municipalities to access some of those funds. And what the federal government's indicated is they want to see 100,000 net new homes over the next 5 years. So if we can just move on. So the other thing I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of is the $2.9 billion under the National Housing Co-Investment Fund that will accelerate the creation of 4,300 new units and the repair of 17,800 new units, or repair of those units. And this is an application-based fund where you can go into 3 different separate streams. So if we can flip to the next one. So there is new construction, revitalization, and then shelter and transitional housing. In the new construction stream, the there is a metric that is used, and you can access it through the link there. I'm not sure if the presentation is going to be made available afterwards, but it's pretty easy to find the scoring grid to look at funding eligibility. And private sector as well as nonprofit affordable sectors, both are eligible for the fund. Oh, great. The link has just been put in there in the chat. So if you flip to the next slide. So the fund will prioritize projects that achieve partnering and co-investment with government, social, private sector, and others. So one of the things that the funding eligibility is going to look at is what type of project are you working with? Are you working with, say you set up a head lease with a charitable nonprofit to designate certain units to be rented to their participants in their program. That's something that's going to be considered in this. So the amount of funding that's established that you can get to, we'll look at the affordability of the units, their accessibility, environmental efficiency, any financial partnerships, proximity to local amenities. Again, the government wants to focus on transit as well as environment in their scoring, and then any on-site supports that you have. So that's how you can set up your program, and you can work with different professionals that have expertise in these kinds of funding applications to make sure that you are designing your project for new builds or for conversions that are, really looking at maximizing, and as Derek indicated, stacking those funding sources. So proponents in this program, they're eligible for repayable loans or forgivable loans, depending on the need. So by repayable loans, that's a loan that's repaid on a monthly basis. Obviously, on a forgivable loan, that would be if your loan would be essentially forgiven if you meet the certain targets. So nonprofits have a maximum of 95% that they can get funding for, 75% for the private sector. And it's that prioritization scoring grid as well that's going to be really important. So when you are looking at making any type of application, really maximizing your scoring is really important to be able to set yourself up to get up to that 75% in either repayable or forgivable loans. There are some other programs that were announced that I just wanted to touch on. Not as many dollars set aside necessarily for these, but building more affordable and energy efficient rental units. So the idea here is to reform the program to strengthen the affordability and energy efficiency requirements to get this type of funding. And the goal here is to have at least 40% of the units it supports provide rent equal or lower to than 80% of the CMHC market rent in your local community. So that's the target there. So it's 40% of the units are at 80% of the average market rent. There's also a desire in the budget to provide more funding to create co-op housing development programs. So there's a goal of additional $1.5 billion to create 6,000 co-op housing units across the country. There's a new greener affordable housing loan program to make existing affordable housing, if anyone on the call has existing affordable housing, to make those units more energy efficient. And then a new program to provide for veteran homelessness programs, so to provide rent supplements to veterans. And again, that may be an opportunity if you engage with an organization that is assisting veterans. You can set up your program for to stack some of that. So you have tenants that are receiving this rent supplement. That may also look good if you're looking to apply to other types of programs or affordability initiatives that are out there. And then amending the Affordable Housing Innovation Fund with the goal of scaling up rent-to-own projects. So those are the other, some of the other programs that are out there, but the Rapid Housing Initiative and the National Co-Investment Fund, I think, are going to be the biggest ones, as well as working with municipalities directly. So as the budget indicated, and as we've seen in recent discussions from the Ontario provincial government and municipalities generally, municipalities have a really important role to play in establishing planning rules and policies to meet the affordable needs of their communities. So the budget and the province have both have set aside the federal budget has set aside some dollars to encourage the streamlining of the planning process for development of housing. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like in each municipality, but there's clearly that will that Derek talked about at all levels of government to build housing and build it faster. There's also direct financial incentives that can be provided by municipalities to help support the creation of affordable housing, including property tax exemption programs. This can include waiving development charges, selling or leasing surplus municipal lands, startup grants, low interest loans, revolving funds. So I just wanted to as well mention the City of Toronto has an open door affordable housing program. It closed February 2022, but with the new dollars available from the federal government, we may see another call for applications for this program. But this, I think, illustrates the type of funding that is available from municipalities directly. So capital funding, property tax relief, fast-tracked planning approvals, and surplus public lands that are available through the municipality. This program is available, as well as the other ones I've mentioned, to private as well as nonprofit affordable housing providers, and can assist with moving through that development process in a way that makes financial sense for private sector developers to build affordable housing. Because as Derek said, if we're not going to have a profit, you're not going to build. So the other example I wanted to provide is just one that I'm involved with directly and I'm quite proud of. So I wanted to share it. It's on the next screen. So this is in the City of London, where I'm based, and it's the Vision Soho Alliance. This is a project that's building 650 units, 400 of which will be affordable. The affordability ranges from, so there's a mix of full market rent, 80% of that average market rent, and then deeply affordable units. And then the city, as well as funding through the National Co-Investment Fund, the city has invested $11.2 million into the total cost of the project, which is $213 million. So this is a group of 6 affordable housing providers that are working together. But there are a lot of creative ways that, developers, you're a creative group. And so I think what the will is at the government level, and they're putting some dollars behind it, is to encourage the development community in the private sector, as well as the nonprofit housing sector, to come up with creative ideas to intensify, to reuse lands that are underutilized for different purposes, use them for residential purposes, and really, again, double the construction of housing. I think, as all of you know, there are certain challenges with the idea of doubling housing construction. We've seen a great boom and some supply chain issues and labor shortage issues. So those aren't really dealt with in these sections, but those will be challenges as we move forward and try to ramp up the pace of residential development in the country. So those are my comments. I don't want to take too much time. I know we have a couple other presentations.
Nope, that's great, Laura. Laura, somebody asked the question, and I don't know if I can ask you. He says, it takes 20 reports to get site plan approval. Okay, I think he was being kind when he said 20 reports, right? Yeah. That is probably the #1 frustration that I hear from developers day in and day out. It was bad before COVID. It's gotten to be sort of nightmarish, right? Part of my thinking is that, when there's a problem big enough, the solution has to get created. We have no choice. Fair enough.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not here today, but it has to be coming. Well, how would you comment on that 20 reports to get site plan approval?
It's a barrier. And
Yes.
I think I think at the federal level, they've indicated, and that's part of the I can't remember what they called it, sorry. The Housing Accelerator Fund, one of the goals is to reduce the red tape, reduce the time it takes to get through the development process, especially when it comes to these residential developments, when we know that there's a huge need for it to reduce the NIMBYism and the barriers to getting a project to shovels in the ground from the application stage throughout it. And what I will say is when there is a political will, and what I've seen directly working with the Vision Soho group, is that the municipality has been really great about accelerating us through the development process and working with us through it. And I would like to see that for all housing projects because there is such a need and such a need that everyone identifies that this is a need. These are projects that the communities need. We need intensification. We need redevelopment of existing underutilized sites. We need those things. We need more housing generally and specifically affordable housing. Right. So if we know that these are the barriers, let's work through it and not put extra hoops in place.
No. Laura, I'm going to bank on common sense of Canadians that we've got a problem. Putting more barriers in front of developers is going to mean less housing. So we would hope and pray that that's what would happen. Okay. All right, great. Okay. So thank you, Laura, for that very much. Thank you. Okay. Our next speaker is John McGinn. He's the Executive Vice President of Chamberlain Architect Services. John, thanks for being here. And these guys have developed a ton of affordable housing. They're good friends of ours, and they speak at our conference every year. And you'll be seeing John and Linnea Chamberlain on our session in June. Okay, John, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Derek. I'm really happy to be here this morning. Let me just quickly share my screen so I can pop open the presentation here and just give me half a second. Let me know when everybody can see that.
You're good. You just got it on. Very good.
We can see it.
Up good? Okay, great. Let me pause it here. And hold on a second here. It's running a little too fast. 1 second. Okay, can everybody see that still or no?
It's in PowerPoint mode though, John.
It's in PowerPoint mode. Okay, 1 second here. As soon as I'm flipping it in, it is going fast. Is that working?
Okay, go back to PowerPoint mode and maybe just maximize that screen.
Yeah, I don't know why it's running so quick here.
Yeah, just slide down your notes a bit and that'll make the screen image bigger. Yeah, I think we can live with that, and then that will work.
So everybody can see that now?
Yeah, that'll work.
Just see here if it's gonna move my notes. Okay, I'll just have to try to scroll through here.
Yeah, you can just use your up and down arrow keys to forward your slides.
Yeah, I think that works. Okay, so thanks again for having us. Obviously very interesting topic that's kind of come up in the last little bit. We've seen a lot of these projects get bogged down over the years. Hopefully, this new program helps to kind of push some of these things through. Derek, you were talking about the 20 reports for site plan approval. It's a minimum of that and a whole bunch of drawings. So we're certainly excited to see this push things along, especially on a smaller scale. I mean, we work on projects from 30 stories down to 3 stories, from Alliston to downtown Toronto. And what the unfortunate part that's happened over the last few years is the policies and the actual program that you have to run through in downtown Toronto has made its way out to the Kincardins of the world. So what that's doing is it's slowing down the process for everything else, and it's not letting us get these projects through. The other thing we look at quite a bit with these new programs is how to modify these buildings and make them kind of come in line to work with these new programs and the different things that kind of keep changing. So it's not an uncommon element And to be honest with you, most of the buildings and most of the times, we're able to adapt these things that are not, let's say, you know, outlandish requests, you know, slightly smaller thresholds to units, slightly larger balconies, things like that, that don't take a whole lot of time to actually implement or cost. And all of a sudden you find yourself within the guidelines for some of these new, from some of these new programs. The other kind of key point, I wanted to just hit on was, you know, what Laura had kind of commented on. There are a lot of different programs. There's a lot of different things up in the air. You know, we've worked on a bunch of these, even up to the open door program, which again is recently closed. But there's different ways and methods of getting through that. And I think, you know, finding and reaching the right consultants to help you through that program. We've had a few developers try to do it on their own. Some of them have been successful, others have hired on consultants to kind of navigate those waters. And it can be a very successful program, and it's not as overwhelming as it seems. I'll kind of skip over the intro just for our firm. We work across the country, we've been around for 40 years. Derek kind of gave us a quick blurb. We do tons of affordable housing work. We also do construction as well. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit more about how these new policies and the differences kind of between condos, apartments, and affordable housing relate to the design world. Okay, so one of the first things that I wanted to talk about was just, you know, understanding your site and how it relates to these new policies. You know, is your site a condo site or an apartment site? So there are differences. There's things certainly to kind of keep in mind. You know, some of the things that work on one site may not work on the next site. You know, those things could be, you know, neighboring supports, neighboring context. You know, these are things that can highly drive the end users of the project. You know, for example, in affordable housing, you know, you probably need things that are, you know, a little more supportive. For example, transportation, subway, buses, bike lanes, things that are kind of close to the project that can help support the tenants at the end of the day. You know, the second thing could be neighboring services as far as, you know, shopping, doctor's office, community supports. You know, these are all factors that play a large role in the affordable housing project, where a condo project may be able to sustain these things because the purchaser has more options available to them, where someone on the affordable side may not. The next thing to kind of talk about is just working with what the site is given. You know, certainly we see a lot of developers come to us with preconceived notions of what they're going to get on the site. And that can maybe make things a little bit difficult. It's always a little nicer if there's a way to kind of work towards the goal. I mean, certainly you have to have in mind, you know, where you're going, what your performer needs to yield at the end of the day. But, you know, if you're coming in and you think you need 15 stories, you still have to kind of play the game and maybe start at 17 or 18 to kind of work your way through the municipality. You know, zoning, planning, urban design will always be challenging. But, you know, you have to make sure that you're doing your due diligence from day one. We'd see a lot of projects that kind of come in the door where, you know, the owner or developer has already come in with some preconceived notions on, you know, this is what we'll be able to do, you know, do this, someone down the street did this. There's a lot of different things that kind of play in line. And I think being able to have, you know, an open mind to different programs that are available, the different, you know, development schemes, you know, maximizing the site. There's lots of different ways of doing that. It's either through, you know, townhouses, mixed use, multiple stories, but there's a lot of different urban design contextual items that also play with it, as far as, you know, setbacks, angular planes, things like that. So I think, you know, going through those elements and doing some of these early schematic design concepts and packages and pre-cons to really help understand the site and not kind of knock yourself into a corner, block yourself back into a corner. You know, some of the other things that are kind of interesting that are popping up that we're seeing on these affordable projects is there are significant cost savings, DCs, and even expeditions of permits. So there's a lot of different affordable groups inside the city, you know, the housing officials, things like that, that can really help your project get pushed through. You know, the Open Door was a great program, and I'm hearing that they're going to be having something else like that again soon. And a lot of the other municipalities are as well, where they're pushing these affordable projects to the top of the list, and the review times, you know, as Derek noted, the review times were ridiculous to begin with, and now they're just unbelievable. So I think some of these elements that the government's trying to push through will help with solidifying these and making things move a little bit faster as they kind of push through. The next thing I want to talk about quickly was just understanding your stats. This is especially large on the apartment side. On the condo side, as we've all seen over the last little bit, it's pretty easy to phase your release to increase your sellable cost at the end of the day. But on the apartment side, it's a little more difficult. You're planning for a building from day one, 3 to 4 years out before you actually open the door, and being able to understand, what those rental rates will be at the time are a little more challenging and not quite as flexible. So I think that's really where your design and your numbers kind of come in, and the size and scope of your building become very important. And smart design versus simple design, and those elements don't necessarily have to mean bad design, right? So saving space is super important and critical to the project. And on the saving of extra square footage, it doesn't always necessarily translate into more rent, where it could on the sellable side. So having a couple of extra square feet here and there on a condo project is maybe a little easier. You can sell that at your $6,000-7,000 a square foot. But on the rental side, if you can save 20 or 30 square feet per unit times 100 unit, there's a significant savings there. Repetition on the apartment and affordable side is key. We're working on a couple of buildings right now. We have a 16-story project that I'm going to show a little later here. 220 keys. I think we have 2 kitchen unit layouts for the whole entire project. So looking at things like this and how to minimize differentiation in your building program and your building layouts can really help to save. It's a critical strategy on the affordable side. We've had great success kind of using that on a few buildings over the past. My next slide here. This is kind of a good image that illustrates some of that repetition. So this is a condo project that we're working on in Niagara Falls. Obviously has falls views, single-sided corridor. Every single unit is custom, but the building itself can yield this type of non-repetitive custom units because there's an opportunity to sell each unit and adjust the prices along the way. We talked about that. So on my next slide here, I wanted to show, this is another project, funny enough, in the same municipality, where we've gone into and done a far more repetitive floor plate, something that is, certainly far more implementable during construction, during sequencing, all of those elements, where there's some good flexibility in the floor plan. We've got 2 bedrooms, we've got 3 bedrooms, we've got bachelors, but from a constructability point of view, it just works quite nice. And really, at the end of the day, your end user, they see the interior and exterior finishes. So, you can still have a, easily repeatable, simplified construction, but still yield some nice materials and spend your money on the actual touchable features of the building. If you can make the bones simple, it's amazing what you can do on the finishes side. So I want to just kind of quickly show a couple of sample projects here, and kind of what we've seen in the last little bit. This is a project that we're working on here where the owner has recently flipped this from an apartment building to a condominium building. So originally we kind of simplified some of the design work. We pulled back a lot of the articulation. And now as they've kind of pushed into the condo world, we've kind of added back some of that articulation. We've gone back to kind of rooftop pools and all these things. But you can see at the end of the day, the 2 buildings themselves are still quite, interesting. And there are avenues where, you can reduce some of the design and still have a nice looking project at the end of the day. This particular project is a complete affordable housing project. On this one, we used a bunch of kind of simple articulations, simplifications of punch windows, some color articulation, and we removed all of the balconies from the project. Something that we're seeing more and more of as we kind of move through on some of these projects. This is another interesting project we're working on in the Toronto area, 127 units, fully affordable. So this particular project, what we did here is a lot of the community space and amenity space on the ground floor. We've integrated with some community programs and stuff. So this is kind of help activate the building, get the community involved, and it also doubles as our amenity space. This particular project is another great example of kind of simple punch windows. We did some Juliet balconies, and this was a complete prefab EFIS building. The next sample, this is a mix of affordable housing and market rent. So it's kind of a nice example of how these elements can work together. This particular project, we've got a real strong composition of glazing, prefabricated EFIS panels with a brick look. This is a side shot of the same building where some of the units have balconies, some of them don't. But this particular building, because of its market component, still has some large rooftop terraces, internal party rooms, workspaces. They've got a loan and borrow program and a concierge for their patrons. Here you can kind of quickly see an example of more of a condo project, higher level of design, facade screens, articulations. These are the kinds of things that we start to see added to these other buildings. Again, similar project, all condo. This has got a much larger, expansive balconies, 8 feet deep, multiple levels of amenity space. And the last image I wanted to show you was a project that we're working on where, again, kind of maximizing the site. We've got a lot of townhouse projects on the site that are going to be pre-sold. Then we have supporting apartment buildings on the site. And one of the things we've been talking about with this particular owner is the flexibility of the program. So, we're looking at a few different financing programs and options. And, you also have the fallback if that, particular model doesn't work. You've got a good mix of product on the site. So I think at the end of the day, I mean, the options are kind of endless. I've tried to show a few different options on the projects and different things that we kind of see. But really at the end of the day, it's just, spending the time and making kind of smart decisions and kind of questioning what's going on. And, taking the time to understand that, design decisions are dollar decisions, absolutely. But there's ways of spending those dollars smartly to, to produce a good project at the end of the day. Derek, I'll hand it
Thank
back
you.
to
Thanks
you.
very much, John. Okay, Rod, we can queue up our next speaker. It's Mark Kay from CFO Financial. And we had to record this session, which we'll show you, and then we'll be back in about 8 minutes to wrap up. Okay, Rod?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Kay, president of CFO Capital. This morning, we're going to talk about the financing side to the Liberals' Affordable Housing Plan. In particular, the CMHC MLI Select program. In summary, the CMHC's MLI Select product offers flexibility to encourage affordability, accessibility, and climate-compatible units. Flexibility includes higher loan-to-values, which we can all enjoy, increased amortization, easy on the cash flow, lower debt service coverage, less to weather the storm, and reduced premiums, which is basically greater for the bottom line. First, we got to focus on the property type and the size. New and existing affordable, energy efficient, and or accessible housing projects include standard rental housing, single room occupancy, supportive housing, and retirement homes. Student housing projects are only eligible to qualify under energy efficiency and accessibility. There's a minimum project size of 5 units, except retirement homes where a minimum of 50 unit beds is required. For the non-residential component, it's not to exceed 30% of gross floor area, nor 30% of the lending value. The loan relating to non-residential component must not exceed 75% of lending value of non-residential component. Now the criteria. The criteria is interesting. It's comprised of points with a minimum of 50 points to qualify. But it could be a combination of all those social outcomes of affordability, accessibility, and energy efficiency, or just as one. So we're going to go through a sample of each social outcome and the point system accordingly. So the definition for affordability, essentially, it's the percentage of units within the project with rents equal to or below established thresholds for the subject market. So for example, affordability, new construction, level 1 is 50 points. You must have a minimum of 10% of units at a maximum 30% of median renter income. Level 2 is 70 points with a minimum of 15% of units. And level 3 is 100 points with a minimum of 25% of the units. Next is affordability existing. Level 1, 50 points, minimum 40% of units at a maximum 30% median renter income. Level 2 is 70% with a minimum of 60% of the units. And level 3 is 100 points with a minimum of 80 units. The following is energy efficiency for new construction. Now, energy efficiency is based upon the improved performance over the baseline. So for example, for the new construction, level 1 is 30 points. You must have a minimum of 20% than the NECB, which is the National Energy Code of Building, or the National Building Code. Level 2 is 50 points with a minimum of 25%. Level 3 is 100 points with a minimum of 40 points. Now for energy efficiency on the existing product, level 1 is 30 points with a minimum 15% decrease over current year baseline. Level 2 is 50 points with a minimum of 25% decrease. And level 3 is 100 points with a minimum of 40%. The third is accessibility. Now, again, the definition for accessibility is based on the level of accessibility and adaptability building design. So for example, level 1, which is 20 points, minimum 15% of the units are considered accessible in accordance with the CSA standard B6 F1-18, or minimum 15% of the units are universal design, or the building receives Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification of 60 to 79% score. Now you can give us a call and we'll go through much more detail what this all means as well. Now for a general guideline for the borrower eligibility, they must demonstrate competence and experience relative to the size and type of the property. So what they're building today, can they prove that they built the same size, similar amount of units in the past, which is a key component. They must demonstrate a minimum of 5 years of management experience. If not, they can achieve a third-party management that has acceptable experience. Next is the borrower's net worth. They must be able to prove at least 25% of the loan in personal equity or corporate equity with a minimum of 100,000. Now, again, if you achieve more than 100 points, there's some flexibility because it relates to some type of non-recourse or limited recourse, which we'll get into. So what does this all mean? There's a spreadsheet that we're going to show on the slide, which kind of puts everything together in the point system. Now, 50 points. And again, just to recap, you can apply and get the point system with one part or all three of the programs. Again, affordability, accessibility, or energy efficiency. So a minimum of 50 points. You can achieve up to 95% loan to cost, loan to value with a 40-year amortization with recourse that is full. Minimum 70 points is up to 95% loan to cost, loan to value, up to 45 years in amortization. And a minimum of 100 points, you get to achieve 95% loan to cost. And here's the benefit, 50-year amortization. And again, this is for all new construction. The limited recourse kicks in once you achieve the 100 points. Now moving to existing properties. With a minimum of 50 points is up to 85% loan to cost, loan to value, 40-year amortization, and full recourse. With the 70 points, you get up to 95% loan to cost, 45-year amortization, and full recourse as well. And again, the benefit here is if you can achieve the 100 points, You get 95% loan to cost, loan to value, up to 50-year amortization with potential of limited recourse. And regarding replacement reserves, it's fairly all discretionary. Now, this concludes the financing side relative to the government program that's been updated and rolled out. We would encourage you to give us a call. There's much more detail that we can share with you and help you out with the program to get access to the billions of dollars that the government has set aside to support the affordable housing in Canada. Thanks a lot and have a great day.
Okay, Mark, thanks very much. Mark was a real trooper. He caught COVID last week and he recorded that over the weekend and sent it to us and we played it there. So I want to just sort of recap. One thing we talked about a lot last year at annual conference was sort of the stigma that goes with affordable housing. And John, you know what I'm talking about here, right? Like people almost just think affordable housing, this is going to be all kinds of people. We're talking about building, maybe a better term would be workforce housing or attainable housing. You're building for, you know, the average guy on the street to some extent, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, we've seen that over and over again on these projects where the conception at public meetings and everything. And I think it's just as far as educating the public as to what this is, because it's not your traditional rundown housing, not even close.
Right. Laura, do you have any comment on that? Just the public's misconception?
Yeah, you know, I've been involved in affordable housing projects that win, you know, architectural and design awards. Like they can be beautiful buildings that are well maintained, you know, and operate efficiently. And you're exactly right. You know, this is for, you know, Canadians who need housing and have, you know, the individuals who can afford these houses. They need to have enough sufficient income to be able to have sustainable housing. You know, we look at a suite mix and an income mix often. You know, it's not totally, you know, 100% affordable housing. It's a mix of usually market and then, you know, 80% and some deeply affordable. You know, the scoring as well is really important. You know, the project has to be financially sustainable in its operating as well. So, you know, long-term sustainability of the project is important, which means having, you know, a range of tenant incomes in the property. And I do think affordable housing gets a bad rap, especially in those public meetings.
You're muted there, Derek.
Sorry, think about the things that we've said here. There's the government will to do this. Fair enough. And there's going to be more will, and eventually they're going to figure it out. Okay. I mean, but the stacking of programs is critical, right? What the federal government's doing, what the province is doing with the municipalities, they have to line up. And right now they don't line up. They're all over the place. Laura, just keeping track of the provincial programs by municipality is a job by itself, right? So it's a challenge, but it's coming. I mean, that's really the message here. It may not be here today, and yes, it's complex, but it's coming. Be ready. Our company's goal is to always be looking ahead and what are the gaps in the market. Laura?
Yeah, and I think as John indicated, you know, having the right consultants and professionals involved that understand these different programs and really help developers navigate where to get the funding and how to position the project and plan for the project to be successful when it's operating as well.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's wrap up. Final slide. So let's just sort of summarize here. If you're a developer, consider your long-term goals. Are you a merchant apartment builder building to sell? And I believe that there is an opportunity to build and sell affordable housing. Okay, lots of people want it, but it's got to get built first. Or are you a long-term holder keeping this for your estate or for your children? Both work, right? Determine the site with affordable housing potential, and that might be changing. Maybe as municipalities look at this more seriously, they'll give you more density, or they'll convert other lands to affordable housing, and and things like that. Number three, you've heard this from a couple of times. Engage early with the municipality, right? The municipality sometimes is your partner on this, right? Or you're working with a nonprofit or some public agency. Number three, determine what to build. And I think John said, keep it simple, right? Keep it simple. You want to build something that's going to be efficient to build. Review federal, provincial, municipal programs. That's including CMHC programs. The stacking is important, and we believe that that's going to come. The financial analysis really tells the story, right? And I think 5 years ago, when we did feasibility studies, nobody asked us to run an affordable housing model. Today, almost all the studies we do, whether they get built or not, we'll see, but people ask us to run the affordable model. And you saw in Mark Kay's presentation, just the preferential finance you get, 50-year amortizations with 95% financing, right? So that means you can put less money into the deal, right? Number 7, identify the strategic community partnerships, management options, property management companies. And then finally, number 8, you finalize, the government contributions. And now you're where you are sort of when you're building a conventional apartment building, but you've got to go through all these steps, and it does take time. Okay, Rod, next slide, please. Okay, so we've actually, over the last 2 years, we have written a book for private affordable developers. It's almost ready to go to the printer here. And the timing just happened to be with this budget. We spent the last 2 years writing this, and this is a roadmap for it. I want to underline the word private, okay? This is a roadmap for private developers to get into the affordable housing building. It's not the story of why we have a problem. It's not the political story. This is the how to build affordable housing. And you're going to get an email in a couple of seconds. We're going to take 25% off the normal price, $100, and you'll receive that in June, okay? Next, we are by nature apartment brokers. This is what we do. We sell apartment buildings, but a big part of our business model is to do webinars on boutique topics, gap in the market topics. And both of these actually relate to affordable. On April 20th and 21st, we're running a seminar on converting office to apartments, okay? And someone mentioned that a little earlier. That is also another source of affordable housing. And again, you'll have the municipality on your side. Nobody wants an empty office building in their community. The city of Calgary has a number of deals right now where office buildings are being converted to affordable. Second is our annual conference. This is our 13th year running it, June 16th and 17th in Toronto. And the topic here, this is 2 full days, high-end event where we're going to be talking about affordable housing and new apartment construction. In details, with numbers, with 75 speakers there that you meet with and talk to and so on. So again, we want to thank you for attending this flash webinar, and we'll be sending you a copy of this and posting on YouTube as well. Laura, John, Rod, thanks for participating, and we'll see you again. Thank you.